Hello, lovely to see you all today. I'm just going to start my screen sharing because everyone loves a PowerPoint. Hi, my name is Riley Coles, pronouns they, them. I am myself an adopter, specifically a non-binary and bisexual adopter, and I have a 13-year-old son. And I work, as mentioned, as a services and family membership manager for New Family Social. So I've worked with hundreds of LGBTQ plus families, adoption, fostering, and kinship across the UK. And I'm also joined today by my colleague Tor. Tor, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Tor Doherty. My pronouns are she, they. I'm the Chief Exec of New Family Social and have been for 10 years. And I am an LGBTQ adopter as well.
As discussed, we're going to be thinking about sort of the journey of a trans or non-binary person through the adoption process. There is lots and lots of things that we could discuss, but obviously this is quite a limited time frame. So we're going to give you a flavour, taster, an introduction as we're going through each of the stages of the process. There'll be an opportunity for you to get into groups and to discuss some case studies that are based on real life. And at the end, there'll be a question and answer session. So it won't just be me talking to you for the next 90 minutes. There'll be chances for you to sort of talk and discuss and to share your thoughts and ideas. I just before we start want to make sure that we're all on the same page and understanding what we mean by trans and by non-binary. So trans is an umbrella term for anyone who doesn't identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. And non-binary is a term for people who don't identify neatly within the gender binary. And by the gender binary, I mean the sort of male or female system that we have. So non-binary people don't identify as wholly only male or wholly only female. There is a wide plethora of terms that are used by trans and non-binary people to describe their genders and their experiences of gender in society. But trans and non-binary are the two main ones that you're going to need to know for today. Tor?
So we wanted to start by saying a little bit about New Family Social, which is the organisation that we're from. We are a network of LGBTQ plus adopters, foster carers and special guardians. And we started in 2007, which was just after the law changed, which allowed same-sex couples to adopt children. But we formed as a network then, and we've expanded over that time. We now have around 10,000 members, so a huge network of LGBTQ plus people. And also agencies can join New Family Social. And I've seen you putting your agency's name into chat for lots of you, which means that lots of you are from agencies who are members of New Family Social. The vast majority of adoption agencies are members. As an organisation, we cover Wales, Scotland, England and Northern Ireland. And we work with both LGBTQ plus people and with the agencies that recruit and support them as adopters, foster carers and special guardians. Next slide, please, Riley, thanks. I'm not going to go down everything that we do, but to give you a flavour of that, we give advice and information to people considering adoption, fostering or special guardianship. And we do that through the means that are shown there on the screen, including we run monthly Could You Adopt or Foster webinars. We offer support to LGBTQ plus people who are in the assessment process or who have children placed with them, whether that's through adoption, fostering or special guardianship. We offer them things like peer mentoring. We have a podcast that this morning is about to pass 77,000 downloads. I was pleased to see this morning. So we'll be plugging that again to you later. That people can talk in forums. We run events all year long and we run a big summer camp every year. We deliver services to professionals. So we've trained more than 1,500 adoption, fostering and special guardianship professionals in all aspects of LGBTQ plus. And the three most commonly run training courses that we offer are one on sexual orientation, one on gender diversity, and one on consensual non-monogamy. So if you're feeling that your agency needs some training on any of those, then give us a shout and we'll come and train you. We're in a weekly free Q&A session for member agency staff. You can turn up and we will train you up for an hour a week on some aspect of LGBTQ issues. and is almost our annual briefing, which I think Riley's going to plug a little bit later, but our annual briefing is rapidly approaching, so we'll get you that in your diaries before you leave. We run campaigns and gather evidence on LGBTQ plus adoption, fostering and special guardianship. And we also have a shop where people can buy books and things that are relevant to what we do. So a really broad range of services. If your agency is a member, it means that everybody LGBTQ plus that you work with gets free membership of New Family Social. If you don't feel like you're using your membership to its fullest, then again, give us a shout afterwards and we'll make sure that you can do. Back over to you, Riley. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Tor. So I'm going to dive straight into talking about recruiting trans and non-binary adopters. I think the main thing to be aware of is that trans and non-binary people in general society often face a great deal of discrimination. And so there is an expectation of discrimination when engaging with any service, including the process to apply for adoption. So when I sort of go to speak at trans community events, the vast majority of people that I speak to are shocked to learn that as a trans person that I am an adopter. They have ruled themselves out of even considering it as an option. So if you want to recruit trans and non-binary people, you have to be specifically targeting recruitment to trans and non-binary people so that they know it's even an option. That doesn't mean that the general recruitment information and campaigns that you run aren't going to be relevant for trans people, but anything that you can do to specifically talk to the trans and non-binary audience is going to be really helpful to encourage people sort of through that very first step of knowing that it is a possibility. When you are doing recruitment for trans and non-binary people, using the words trans and non-binary and using the flags for trans and non-binary people are very, very helpful. But also thinking about, and when you're doing a targeted campaign, using some specific imagery of trans people, using stock photos of trans people, or stock photos of people that you don't know their gender and describing them as a trans person is really helpful just to see ourselves reflected in that recruitment media. One thing that is very noticeable is if that happens as a one-off and only during Pride Month, for example, or if it's clear that year round an agency is considering and including and welcoming trans and non-binary and other LGBTQ plus people. So take every opportunity that you can to include trans and non-binary people in sort of the standard social media that you're doing and the campaigns that you're running, and in when you're giving talks and presentations, being inclusive as a habit rather than as something that you do specially just for the trans people. And then coming back to what I said about that expectation for discrimination, it's really important that once you've let people know that it is a possibility for them and that they will be welcomed at your agency, it's important that you've done the background training to make sure that that first contact is going to be really positive. So I started the process 10 years ago, and makes me feel really old every time I have to add another year onto that number. But when I started the process, I rang around all the agencies in my area and was like, hi, I'm Riley, I'm trans and I'm thinking of adopting. Do you have any experience with trans adopters? And sadly at that time, none of the agencies in my area did. But the way that they answered that question was still really helpful, because there were some places who were like, you what? What's trans? And they very quickly got crossed off my list. Whereas the agencies where the inquiry line was like, no, sadly, we don't have any experience of trans adopters yet, but we'd love to. We'd really welcome an application from a trans person or a trans couple. And we've got lots of experience of working with LGBT people. And yeah, so, you know, tell us more about yourself. What are you, what's brought you to adoption? And just the warmth, the fact that they were informed, and just simply that they were warm and friendly went a really long way to making me feel that it was okay for me to sort of approach them and work with them. Once they're through the door, you still need to sort of keep up that inclusivity. So There may be people who are like me, very sort of open and upfront about being trans, but there are also many trans and non-binary people who may not know when is the right time to talk about their gender, or may wonder if may wonder if it's ever safe for them to talk about their gender. So you can't know from looking at somebody what their gender is. So any person that you see in the street, when you look at them, you don't know for certain what their gender is. Currently, I'm looking a little bit of a cliche trans person. I've got like short green hair. But when I applied to adopt, I had sort of, long brown hair down the middle of my back, and I wore dresses and looked a great deal more femme than I do. And people generally, when they saw me, didn't assume that I was LGBTQ plus, let alone that I was trans. One of the things that trans and non-binary adopters have said is that it's clear to them that the social worker is making a special effort to be inclusive and ask them questions about pronouns and sort of checking which box to fill out in the form. And that's great for those people who are visibly trans and are being or are known to be trans, but there'll be people that you're assessing who you don't know are trans, and if you aren't habitual with your inclusivity, you may miss those people, or you may make life harder for those people. So if you only ever introduce yourself with your pronouns when you think that you're talking to a trans person, that shows. It needs to be something that you sort of just build into your practice and your sort of daily working to always, and so when I introduce myself, hi, my name's Riley, my pronouns are they, them. That gives space for the other person to introduce themselves in the same way. Whereas if you only ask it of people who think are trans, then it can be an uncomfortable, maybe othering feeling. It's also, there can be some sort of landmines in the assessment process for trans and non-binary people. There are some barriers to adoption and fostering that can be sadly more common amongst trans and non-binary people. And that again leads that sort of ruling themselves out factors that I talked about earlier. So sadly, it is more common for trans and non-binary people to be estranged from their families of origin than it is for cis people. And it's also more common for people to have experienced perhaps mental health difficulties or issues around housing or employment. That, as we know, many adopters think that they have to have a perfect life with no challenges in order to be good adopters, whereas in fact oftentimes the reverse is true. Those people who have experienced adversity and overcome it can sometimes make the very best adopters. But being open to the fact that people might have difficult stories that they want to talk about, that they will need to be open about and sort of discuss with you, is important, and particularly around family and family relationships. People can have an excellent support network that doesn't involve any single member of their family of origin. And it's very common for trans and non-binary people to have what's called a found family, of people that they have sort of built into a family over their life rather than the family that they were born into. You also need to be really mindful about trans people's privacy during the assessment process. It is natural, it's human nature to be curious about people, but there are some things that you need to know in order to do a good assessment, and there's some things that you don't need to know. So it is very common for people to not want people want to only be known as the name that they're using now and the pronouns that they're using now, and people don't typically want everyone or sometimes even anyone to know what name they used to use. This can be difficult if someone hasn't legally changed their name yet. So when I started the assessment process, I hadn't legally changed my name yet. So I was called Riley by everyone in my life, but my ID document still had my old name on it. So when I had to do the ID checks for my criminal records check, it was really awkward and difficult. And I was like, I don't want to show you these. How can we make this work? And there is actually a process that the DBS service operates for trans and non-binary applicants. So making sure that people are aware of that, whether or not you already know them to be trans, is really helpful. So we're going to move on to a couple of case studies. So you can think these are all drawn from real life. So what I am going to do is I'm going to put people into breakout rooms so that you can discuss the case study and sort of think about how would you approach this situation if it sort of came up in your practice, in your work. And then if you have any questions, please save them to the Q&A at the end. But when you come back together, I will tell you what did actually happen in real life for this person. And I want to really encourage you to use this as an opportunity to practice using people's pronouns if they're perhaps something that's new to you, or that you're not sort of familiar with using, and also to practice challenging each other. If someone does slip up, finding a way to sort of politely remind someone that they've used the wrong pronoun, for example, or misunderstood someone's gender, and also to practice receiving that feedback and that correction, because that feedback is a gift to allow you to do better in the future and to make sure you're getting things right. So yeah, practice accepting that correction with grace. Trans people don't need you to sort of self-flagellate if you accidentally misgender someone, if you use the wrong pronoun or misunderstand something, then often that self-flagellation is makes things more uncomfortable rather than less uncomfortable for the trans person. So if you slip up, ideally just very, very smoothly, just correct yourself and move on. For example, if I said, oh yeah, I'm going to visit Sarah next after this meeting. Sorry, and then move on. You don't need to sort of get into a big song and dance. Like, I'm so sorry. I'm the worst person in the world. It's terrible. Don't get into that. So I'm just going to introduce the two case studies and then I'll put you into the breakout rooms. So this is Leo, and this is a message that they sent. Hi, I'm Leo. I'm 30 years old. I work part-time as an artist and part-time as a youth worker, an art project for disabled children and young people. I live in a house with 2 spare rooms and I'm really interested in adopting siblings. I tried my local agency already, but they said that I don't have enough experience and turned me away. And then the second case study is Tamara. She says, hi, can you give me some advice, please? On the paperwork you gave me, it says that you need references from everywhere that I've worked with children. And I used to work at a holiday club for disabled children. It was before I came out though, and everyone there knew me as a man. I don't want my ex-boss to know that I'm trans, and I don't really want my dead name in my PAR either. What should I do? Okay, giving people a second to get dragged out of their breakout rooms by Zoom. Looks like we've got a lot of people back in. Not quite everyone yet. 1 second. Okay, so I'm sure that will have generated hopefully a lot of questions for people, and we'll come to them at the Q&A at the end, and also sort of, potentially if there's specific questions that it's thrown up for you about individuals that you're working with, I'm also happy to speak to those outside of this session. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, because these are drawn from real life examples, I'm going to sort of let you know what did happen in practice for each of these case studies. So the first one is a bit of sad news, I'm afraid. So Leo is now not pursuing adoption. So thankfully, the second agency that Leo spoke to was suitably shocked that Leo was turned away for lack of experience, just because on paper, they're obviously a fantastic candidate. They've got direct experience with young people, specifically with disabled children. They've got enough space for siblings and they're interested in adopting siblings. And it was really shocking to both the second agency that they spoke to and to me when I found out about this case. I was really, really shocked that they were turned away. And when we looked into it, Leo sort of decided that they were going to pursue a complaint against that first agency, and it turned out it was a case of fairly blatant transphobic discrimination. And the complaint was upheld, but sadly, the whole experience really put Leo off adoption. And simultaneously, they got a really great job offer for a sort of like famous national art gallery. So instead, they moved to London and got a big fancy art job. So you never know. Maybe they'll come back to adoption sort of later in life. But yeah, I was really, really disappointed that such a great candidate was turned away. Tamara's was more positive. So this one's a bit of sort of a nitty-gritty practical question. So what the agency ended up doing was choosing one person in the admin team who Tamara was sort of comfortable with that person knowing her old name and her old pronouns. So she gave that person those details. The admin team processed the application as though it was just a man called her old name who was applying to adopt. And then when they received the reference back from the employer, they redacted the name and pronouns wherever they appeared. They saved one copy, but they had made a redacted copy, which replaced the name and pronouns with the current accurate one, so using Tamara and she, her, and with a quick note to explain that that's what they'd done, and that went into the PAR as that went into her records as any other reference would have done. So her ex-boss never knew about her new name or her trans identity, and it also really minimized the number of people who were aware of her previous name, and minimized the risk of that getting shared in a way that she wasn't comfortable with. It's one of those ones where you have to balance two different legal duties. So you've got your duty to not reveal Tamara's trans status and protect her personal information, but also that safeguarding duty to make sure you are getting those references. But I guess the important thing is to have that conversation with the person to find out what's important to that person, and find a way that you can meet those legal duties, but in a way that's going to make the applicant feel really supported and cared for and comfortable with how it's going forward. In one of the, I was sort of hopping through some of the breakout rooms whilst you were discussing, and in one of the breakout rooms, people sort of were thinking about there's lots of information that someone might, from someone's sort of life history, that might be specifically pertinent to their trans identity, and how prominent should that be in their PAR? So the group was specifically talking about if someone had sort of gender affirming surgery, how can you discuss that in a PAR without sort of outing someone? But there's the various other things that might come up. And again, it's going to be really specific to the individual. So for some people, they are really comfortable to have their transness sort of like very sort of upfront and sort of discussed throughout their PAR, sort of as it comes up. And for other people, they might want to keep it sort of more low profile. So there might be like a paragraph or two that talks about their transness, but the rest of that PAR is really focused on their support network and their experiences, their with children, young people, their motivations to adopt, their sort of their lifestyle, their practical skills, etc., etc. So for some people, they'll see transness as really sort of really key to their identity and really sort of central to how they want to sort of parent and present themselves to the world. For other people, it's going to feel for them like a much more minor issue. So if you see it as like a big and new and maybe scary thing. Be aware that for the person, the individual that you're dealing with, it's going to be old news to them because they've been living it for years, for their whole life potentially, or for quite a long time. They've been sort of living their life as a trans person. So yeah, it's going to be again a conversation with that individual. I know when I was going through the assessment process, my social workers took some advice from Tool, as it happened, about how to present it in my PAR. And in the end, they asked me to write the section, sort of the paragraph, the sort of the section that was describing my gender, because my social worker is a bit nervous about trying to sort of put words in my mouth, and I was happy to do that. And we also decided to put some sort of supporting information about non-binary people into my PAR as well. So in the end, I had my profile, and then sort of as an addendum to that, I had a fact sheet about non-binary, because this was early days, and I was, as far as we know, I was the first person to be out as non-binary through the whole adoption process in the UK. So almost every professional that I was dealing with, it was their first time thinking about non-binary people. So we ended up having to do, a sort of like a FAQ type document that went along with my profile. I would hope that wouldn't be necessary today, and that you'll be able to find social workers and adoption and fostering and family finders who are more up to date. But certainly in my case, my transness was very front and center, whereas other people really want to minimize discussion of that in favor of everything else that you would discuss in someone's PAR. The other thing I wanted to particularly mention around sort of like family finding and panel, etc., is thinking about that matching panel. So it's really, really great if you're social workers, assessing social workers, supporting social workers, and people in the inquiry line are getting training and support in working with trans and non-binary people. But if they then get to panel, and there are panel members who are either perhaps hostile or just completely ignorant about trans and non-binary issues, they could potentially be asked some very inappropriate questions, or very unnecessarily uncomfortable questions at a time when people are already extremely, extremely nervous. So if possible, you want to be training everyone that may come into contact with trans or non-binary applicants, not just the key staff that are working directly with them. And then also thinking about sort of ongoing support needs for trans and non-binary people. So obviously, being able to assess and approve and family find for someone is great, but then eventually the goal is for them to become a parent, and to be introduced to a child and then or children, and then raise those child or that child or those children to adulthood, and become a family for the rest of their lives. So assessment, the need for sort of trans and non-binary skillful support doesn't end after matching day. One of the key things that trans and non-binary people sort of talk about is navigating sort of that school environment, and sort of working with choosing the right school for their child. So anything you can do in terms of post-adoption support, or if it's an older child, thinking about choosing the right school for when that child moves in with their new parent or parents, helping them to explore what school is going to be the right option, because you're obviously thinking about the child's needs, any additional needs that they have, making sure that it's going to be an adoption aware school, that's going to be trauma informed, but also that it's going to be an LGBTQ plus friendly school. For many of us, we went to school during Section 28, where it was illegal for school staff to speak positively about LGBTQ plus people, for fear of being seen as encouraging homosexuality. So for many of us, many adults, trans people, and also the adult staff that are working with them, our experiences of school were that it was a place where LGBTQ plus people weren't mentioned at all, or were mentioned in a really hostile way, sort of like through bullying and through sort of ignorant comments from classmates and peers. Things have moved on a long way from that. So making sure that families know that they can expect better of early year settings, of primary schools and secondary schools, that they can expect to find schools that are sort of open and welcoming and accepting of trans and LGBTQ plus families, to the point where my son's primary school had a sort of an offshoot of the PTA that was specifically for rainbow families associated with the school. And there were multiple sort of trans and gender questioning even at his primary school. So yeah, things have moved on a lot. And so sometimes, yeah, letting people know what's possible and what's out there is really important. And it's also important that you're there when things do go a bit wrong, that you're able to source post-adoption or post-placement support for people that is going to be sort of inclusive and well-informed and sort of culturally competent to support trans and non-binary people. So is it something that is even, if you have a database of support services, is it a question that is even asked of new suppliers and new sort of support agencies that you're working with? Do you know whether or not the therapists that you refer people to have got specific training, for example, around LGBTQ plus issues? Where would you go if you needed to find a short breaks carer for a family that has got trans parents in it? So try making sure that you are thinking about that holistic picture, that wider support network around the family, not just how are you going to do an assessment and fill out the paperwork. One of the key things that really makes a difference is, of course, representation and peer support. It is a sad fact that well, it's not necessarily a sad fact, it's a fact that trans people are a minority group in society, and adoption families are a minority group in society. So when you are a minority of a minority, it can be hard to see yourself and see families like yours reflected in the world around you. So anything that you can do to share sort of books and films and media that has that representation, but crucially real life people with those shared experiences makes all the difference. So if you have sort of peer networks within your agency for LGBTQ plus people, that's really valuable. And obviously you can always send people to direct people to New Family Social, because we have both sort of social groups and specific support groups for LGBTQ plus adopters, foster carers and kinship carers, including one specifically for trans and non-binary people. And it's a really valuable opportunity for the parents and carers to be able to speak to each other about their experiences and things that they've gone through, but also for the children to see families that look like theirs. So anything you can do to connect people to that peer support is really invaluable. And then before we go on to the case studies, I also want to, when we're thinking about ongoing support, we're also thinking about sort of ongoing sort of skills development for yourself. So it's really helpful if you can invest in making sure that you're staying up to date and informed about trans and non-binary people. So thinking about, just in your professional life and in your personal life, do you ever see media or social media that's produced by trans and non-binary people? Is it something that is in your daily sort of language in your daily life, or is it something that you are completely new to? So how can you seek out books by trans authors, social media accounts by trans people, family blogs by trans people, podcasts, etc., so that it's something that becomes more normalized and something that you become more comfortable thinking about and talking about. Because if you haven't ever worked with a trans or non-binary family yet, someone is going to be your first applicant, trans or non-binary applicant that you work with, and you ideally don't want them to feel like they are your guinea pig. So anything that you can do to practice and get comfortable beforehand is going to be really will have big outcomes for that person. So as a team, practice introducing yourselves with your pronouns, practice talking about trans and non-binary people, making sure that you're using the correct gender terms and pronouns for them, practice correcting each other and accepting that correction, and make it something that you're comfortable asking questions about, rather than something that you're sort of feeling fearful and trepidatious about. Because for you, it might be a novel and perhaps scary experience, but for the trans person, this happens day in and day out. Okay, so 2 more case studies to look at. This is Janie and River. Janie uses she, her pronouns, River uses they, them pronouns. And they've gone to an activity day as part of the family finding process. Hi, thanks for checking in. The activity day is going pretty well, I think. It's really emotionally intense, but we're really connecting with the children that we're being considered for. There's one thing though, their foster carer keeps making comments like how nice it'll be that the kids will have 2 mums. He means well, but he clearly doesn't understand that I'm not a woman. So that's River speaking there. And then the second one is thinking about that sort of post placement support. So this is Alex. He says, I just had one of my early placement therapy sessions, but I didn't really get on with the therapist. I was explaining that I want the baby to call me Papa when he's older. She laughed in my face and she said that, oh, it sounds like something a posh kid would call their father, Papa, Papa. It was actually really hurtful because as a trans man and as an adopter, I've spent a long time thinking about what I want to be called. It makes it hard to trust her and to open up about everything else that's going on. Okay, giving folks a second to come back and join the room, and then I'll talk through the sort of what happened in real life for each of these cases. So talking first about Janie and River, I'm pleased to say this actually went really well. The social workers and River decided to not address anything at that specific session because activity days are overwhelming enough as it is. But the match was progressing. So the social worker, as well as starting to do some direct work with the children around sort of like diversities and different types of families, that also had some conversations with the foster carers and did some sort of like basic introduction to the concepts of trans and non-binary. And thankfully the foster carer, as we said, meant really well. And so once he knew better, he did better. So yeah, that was really positive. And in this case, Alex decided to, and the social worker talked about it, and the social worker spoke to the therapist's organisation about what had happened, and the therapist asked to have a session with Alex to apologise. But in that session, it was not so much apology as a I'm sorry you felt bad. And so they ended up assigning a different therapist for Alex, and that therapist was asked to do some additional training around sort of LGBTQ plus competency. And thankfully, Alex got on a lot better with the new therapist, because he was having a tough time and needed the support. And that first match wasn't going to be a right match. And I think with post-adoption support, if it doesn't, it's so hard to get sometimes that people feel that they have to take whatever they're given. But the wrong match can actually be less helpful than no support at all. So yeah, I'm really glad that Alex felt able to raise it, and that his agency were responsive, and he got the right support eventually. Okay, so before we finish and move on to the question and answer session, I want to talk about some of the specific strengths that trans and non-binary people have as parents and carers. So in the past, it was relatively common for social workers and adoption professionals to see being LGBTQ plus as something that people could adopt or foster despite being LGBTQ plus, despite being trans. It was a barrier that they could overcome and still proceed with adoption. And it was very much in the sort of the con side of the pros and cons, or the weaknesses side, when thinking about the strengths and weaknesses of any particular adopter or adoption applicant. Whereas there are specific strengths that non-binary and trans people have when it comes to adoption or fostering. And if you're able to recognize these strengths and to let the adopters know that you recognize these strengths, that goes a long way to helping them feel sort of supported and understood and seen by you and by your adoption agency. Many LGBTQ plus people know from a very early age that they are LGBTQ plus. You hear of trans people from as soon as they're able to vocalize, talking about saying, "Daddy, I'm a boy." So from 2, 3, 4 years old, was for many people they have grown up knowing that they are LGBTQ plus, and so they haven't been thinking of family life in a cis-normative way. So they haven't been assuming that they're going to be a woman who meets a man and has babies, or vice versa. They've known that their family life may be slightly different to that sort of like cookie cutter mold. And many trans and non-binary people are coming to adoption or fostering as their first choice for forming a family or growing their family. And that can be a really positive message for the children that they then go on to adopt. Trans and non-binary people are often connected to the trans or non-binary community and the wider LGBTQ plus community, and those community building skills that we have and that we practice are invaluable to supporting us in terms of our support networks, and sort of like the resilience that sort of like community support brings, but also is helpful for our children for them to be able to tap into that community and to that village of the "it takes a village to raise a child" fame. We have also, many of us, had often extensive experience of exploring questions of identity and of belonging. So thinking about, how do we see ourselves? How do we want to express ourselves? How do we understand ourselves? Where do we fit into our families of origin and our found families? Where do we fit into sort of the wider world? Those experiences obviously aren't identical to the questions of identity and belonging that adopted children grapple with, but they are relatable and they are helpful when it comes to understanding and supporting our children in grappling with their own questions of identity and belonging. And then finally, sadly, it's a fact that many of us have had to hone and practice our advocacy skills when dealing with services, from GPs to education to employment, community services, housing, all sorts. Many of us have had to practice our advocacy skills for ourselves and for our friends, family members, and community members. So we often have advocacy skills that can become extremely helpful when you are an adoptive parent and you're making sure that your child is making their way through the EHCP process, or that they're getting access to sort of specialist swimming lessons, or they need to have a particular treatment or whatever thing you need to advocate for. We are often more skilled and practiced at advocacy than our cis and heterosexual counterparts, those people who aren't trans and aren't LGBTQ+. So yeah, if you are able to demonstrate that you understand these strengths, then hopefully any trans or non-binary people that you're currently working with, or that you do work with in the future, will know and feel how much you want to support them as trans and non-binary people towards their future as adoptive parents. So I'm going to be moving on to questions very soon. So if you have a question, please do start popping them into the chat. You can ask them in the chat to everyone if you want to, or if there's a question that you want to ask a bit more privately, you can send it as a direct message to Tor. Tor, do you want to pop us hello in the chat so people can sort of find you in the chat? And you'll be able to ask questions. We'll take it, me and Tor will take it in turns to answer various questions that you have until the end of the session. Okay.